7 days in a row here on YouTube. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. Live stream number 47, 47 days, live stream number 47, 47th live stream. 7 and 40 live streams today. All right, well, let's jump on into before I forget, let me make sure to pull up YouTube here so that we can be sure to respond to any questions and comments come in on the live stream. And let's jump on in. Let's dive on in. Let's dive in head first. All right. So I saw this tweet come across my desk. Philip Jackson. Oh my word, this is absolute genius. And this is a tweet from Patrick Kodu. Twitter handle sounds like canoe. So maybe his last name is Kadu, Patrick Kadu. E-commerce merchant recently was on Shark Tank, which I noticed, which is super cool. Huge congrats. Tweet is 9 million impressions on Unsplash, completely free. Run, don't walk. And basically what he did is, so Unsplash is a free stock photo site, which I've used before to pull down free stock photos. It's great. It's like amazing because as a user of Unsplash, you get these generally great quality stock photos completely free. And so it almost is like too good to be true kind of a thing. But the benefit to the creators that are creating those is that they can get exposure for themselves, that kind of a thing. And this is a really interesting kind of a little growth hack here where he's had 9 million impressions of his products. Now, with your marketing, I'm trying to get a better view of these, but I can't really see them. But anyway, you can kind of see the pictures there. But so, actually, I think one of my replies maybe has a better picture. Here we go. Oh, here we go. Here's the actual Unsplash page. So, you might be saying with your marketing hat on, like, okay, like, does he have logos on these pictures? Does he have watermarks? Like, how can we make sure that our logo is being shown to people as they're using it? And of course, the great thing about Unsplash is there aren't any watermarks. There aren't generally logos. As an Unsplash user, you're just using these for the product shots, for the photography itself. But what's interesting about his products is that he mentioned is that the razors have a really unique look to them. And so just the fact that people are getting exposed to this visually is kind of a powerful form of marketing for him. And so, 9 million impressions totally free. Imagine what that would cost for, paid as paid distribution. It's pretty impressive, and just an interesting little growth hack there. So if you're in e-commerce, you might want to consider trying that out. Probably is going to work better if you do have a product that's really unique, where again, you don't need to have your logo slapped all over the place in order for you to get some, sort of some brain share from people looking at the photos. And by the way, one thing I'm curious about, the 9 million, I wonder, is that, I'd imagine they'd have to just be the views to the Unsplash page. Whereas if somebody, actually downloaded that photo and used it on their website, which is, of course, is what Unsplash is all about, there's no way those views could be tracked. Unless they're doing something really smart like crawling the web and finding. No, I doubt they could do that. So on top of this 9 million, all the times somebody downloaded that, put it on their website, you're getting probably many multiples more than this of visibility. So super interesting little hack there for y'all to check out. Okay, next up, another e-commerce topic here. LinkedIn takes forever to load, man. Forever to load. It's loading. There we go. Okay. This is a LinkedIn comment from Brandon here. Brandon Batchelor, cool name. So he was asking whether I've done an episode on e-commerce returns specifically, and then he mentioned I think all return platforms should be reviewed. For example, Narvar is thousands to implement, and most aren't sure why. When Returnly takes up to 15% of sales when they use their product plus monthly fees. A lot of questions. So this is an interesting category. I didn't really know too much about sort of returns platforms up until my buddy Ali Ahmed of Imagination Media had mentioned to me that he was working on a product in this space. And I think we had talked about Narvar specifically. And it's an interesting space because, like, I don't know, and I've heard since first hearing about it from Ali, I've heard a couple different people talk about some of these products and things like that. And what's interesting is that the pricing really does seem to be fairly high, and I'm sure that they're providing a lot of value for the price. You know, it's interesting. I saw a great post from Nathan Barry the other day on value, pricing versus value. And when, as somebody that's building products, you want to price appropriately to value. So you want, if you're giving a lot of value, you want to charge more and stuff like that. And you hear that advice a lot, charge more. But then it's kind of like, there's also something good about leaving some value on the table, because when you don't, when you're always charging exactly the amount of value, on the one hand, it's fair because, you're charging a lot because you're giving a lot of value. But on the other hand, there's very little budge room, right? And I get the sense this is one of those areas where products are charging maximum prices, and it seems like it's going to be relatively easy to compete with them on price and quality without knowing too intimately all of the specifics of the functionality. So anyway, Ali has a product that's going to be hitting the scene any day now. He mentioned he's already piloting it with a customer, and it should be, I believe it's called Relay. It's going to be relaycloud.io, but that website isn't live yet. So definitely keep an eye out for that. That's going to be interesting to check out. And obviously this isn't like an in-depth review of all of the returns platforms. I might try to do that at some point, but this is just kind of a brief, discussion of this topic. So yeah, returns, very interesting. Okay, next up. Cricket protein. So cricket protein is wild. First of all, to those of us in the U.S., it sounds kind of gross. We're not accustomed to, generally any kind of insect protein, whatnot. It, obviously grosses me out a little bit, but I've heard a couple of podcasts on how it's gonna be a big thing in the U.S. It's already a big thing in many parts of Asia. And it's one of these things that's coming over. Sushi, there was a time when sushi was totally gross to the American, palate, right? Like, think about it objectively. Like, crickets sound kind of gross. Raw fish also sounds kind of gross, right? But you get used to it. You go, oh, that's really good. And I think the same exact thing is going to happen with cricket protein. Crickets are unique in the sense that the cost per pound of protein or per unit of protein is dramatically lower with crickets than it is with like beef, chicken, pretty much anything else. Like, they have a massive amount of protein relative to their size. And so it just makes sense economically. I mean, we have to find more sustainable ways to create food and things like that. So it just makes sense. People will get over the kind of the gross factor over time. And this is probably a really smart thing to build an e-commerce brand around. And I'm sure there's already tons that have gotten into the space, but I'm sure there's tons of opportunity. Just the fact that most people think it's gross shows that it really has not reached the level of the mainstream distribution that it's going to reach probably over the next 10 years. And by the way, I shamelessly copied this from a tweet who I am not giving credit to the original tweeter, but it was a whole bunch of charts of different things, cricket protein being one of them, and all sorts of other things. I wish I could credit the original tweeter, but all sorts of random trends and things like that. And this was just one of them. So 2 words, cricket protein. We're going to have to keep an eye on that. And that is all I will say there. Okay, next up. By the way, I have continued to iterate on my little quote jobby here. I now have query string parameter support for different quotes implemented right in JavaScript. Social media isn't a bad thing. So, social media is often talked about as a mostly sort of bad thing. It's generally seen as good advice to sort of get off of social media. The idea of, social media fast is sort of universally seen as like a good thing. And social media is just a modern digital form of socializing. And so like just the idea that somebody would say, I'm going to stop socializing, and that you would say, oh, you would assume that's a good thing is such a weird idea, right? Like when it comes to socializing, we recognize there are healthy forms and unhealthy forms. So we don't throw the whole thing into one category and say like, yeah, you should get off of socializing. You definitely, good job. Like somebody said, I'm going to stop socializing for the month of December. You wouldn't automatically be like, right on, that's awesome. You'd kind of be like, wait a sec, are you sure it's a good idea? Like what you want to see is like people saying, hey, I'm going to prioritize healthy forms of socializing and deprioritize unhealthy forms of socializing, right? And so I think the same is true of social media. I've been on kind of a kick lately, and you really can curate your social media profiles in such a way that you can just learn a ton. You can really build relationships with people, and you can work on your schedule in such a way that, you kind of have a little bit of a healthy balance. Do I have a perfectly healthy balance? No. I mean, it's something that I want to work towards. And yeah, maybe disconnecting entirely can be a good thing to kind of help you readjust a little bit. But I just think there's a little bit of a bias too much in that direction. I think the conversation should be more around how can we make our usage more healthy versus this binary on-off deal with social media. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm gonna make these shorter because I'm trying to do more of these like 30-second TikTok style clips, and it tends to be hard to do a 30-second clip when the segment is like 10 minutes long. All right. Reading is correlated to success. Maybe one day Twitter usage will be. Here's what I mean by this. And I'm hearing crying in the background, which is always fun. I wonder if I can mute my audio so I can... All right. So what I mean by this is, a lot of times, and I saw a tweet recently, where people talk about how reading is one of the major indicators of correlation to success in business and life in general. A lot of people encourage you to read more. and again, I'm on this kick where I'm spending a lot of time consuming and learning a lot on social media, and I'm digging it. And I'm kind of, to be honest, like I'm just not wanting to read a lot in terms of like books. And I think that, you know, the gut reaction to that is like, yeah, that's a bad thing. Like you need to sit down and focus and things like that. And that may be entirely true. But I want to push back on that idea a little bit. You know, Gary Vee talks a lot about this idea of not being romantic around forms of communication. So, for example, why is it considered more meaningful to sit down and write a handwritten card to somebody versus to send a text and things like that? And like, why is it considered more meaningful to sit down and read a book versus to read a lot of stuff on social media? And the answer in this context is people will say, well, there's studies that correlate reading books to all sorts of different success metrics, right? But then I was thinking, you know, a lot of those, like, first of all, I haven't looked into those studies specifically, but I'd imagine, you know, those types of studies are going to be trailing indicators, right? If they're whatever sample size they're looking at, you know, maybe they're looking at something over the past 10 years or 50 years or 30 years when there wasn't as much available on the internet. And I was thinking to myself, you know, maybe one day there's going to be a study that compares like people that use Twitter, maybe versus people that use Facebook, let's say. Maybe there's more correlation to success in your career, or LinkedIn. Maybe people that use LinkedIn, there's more of that correlation. Like I think these trends are going to emerge over time. You know, because certainly there are certain types of social media, certain types of entertainment that sort of fundamentally are not productive. But I think that, again, some forms of social media can be highly productive, both in terms of learning things, consuming information, also sharing information and developing your communication skills. So I think we'll see that, you know, I think we'll see stuff like that. It also makes me think about gaming in the sense that 20 years ago, you know, if, you know, you would say, well, if you spend your time gaming, you're wasting your time, right? All of the studies would have shown that not gaming is correlated to success, right? Like reading and doing your homework is correlated to success. Well, 20 years later, gaming has evolved to where it's a professional career for a lot of people. And so if you just purely looked at those past studies, you'd say gaming's a waste of time, but you know, all of those things change, right? So yeah, I think that that's going to be an interesting trend to follow. All right, I'm moving along at a nice brisk pace this morning. Moving along at a very nice brisk pace. Maximize your flow state for fun and profit. Okay, so I've done a bunch of things recently. I've talked about turning off notifications, and I've gotten some good engagement on those things, some agreement, some disagreement. I just saw another great comment this morning from somebody who was like, this is so true. I spend so much time replying on Slack and email, and to turn off notifications is so great. But one thing I think that I need to do a better job of, instead of communicating it in the negative, which is to say turn off your notifications. I did that one post, which was, you know, sort of slightly overly dramatic in the way I worded it, where I said having notifications on while you work is unprofessional. And I think I tried to clarify that, but I think I need to communicate it in the positive, which is you want to maximize being in a flow state for a number of reasons. As a developer, for one, it feels great. It feels great to be in that flow state. If you don't know what a flow state is, there's a lot of information on it. Some people call it being in the zone, whatever. It's where you're just concentrated. Time moves kind of quickly. You're banging stuff out. You're really productive, and you're getting things done. And it's an enjoyable sort of mental state, enjoyable and productive mental state. And the contrast of that is if you're constantly interrupted, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, you're replying to Slack notifications, you're most likely not in a flow state in those scenarios, and things like that. And so Like I remember, when I was developing, full time and stuff, I'd love to get into the zone for a couple hours at a time and just knock stuff out. And it feels good as a developer. So I want to give some perspectives from the developer perspective and then from the employer perspective. Okay, so as a developer, it feels good. You're gonna be really productive. You're gonna be highly productive. That's gonna correlate to higher pay, right? If your productivity is much greater, your pay is gonna increase. Now, it might not happen immediately. It might be over time, but that's sort of a no-brainer. If you're, now there's also a negotiation aspect to that. If you don't negotiate at all, you never ask for a raise at all, then, you got to have some of those elements in there. But ultimately, if you're twice as productive next year as you were this year, then it's going to make sense for your employer to pay you more, and things like that. So it feels good. You're going to feel more productive. You're going to feel more productive. It's going to correlate to higher pay at some point, right? Now, from the employer perspective, the challenge, of course, is you're saying, well, I love okay, great. The idea of flow state sounds great, cool, whatever. But look, if I need something from my developer, I need to tell them right now because I need that. Client needs it, needs to happen quickly. So if you're telling me to never interrupt my team, I can't work with that. That doesn't work for me. That doesn't work for our workflows. That doesn't work for our client expectations. And so what I want to say to the employer is that you really want to maximize that flow state of your team and develop asynchronous workflows because it's going to ultimately increase your profitability. It's going to increase your productivity of your team. So if you create an environment where the expectation is for developers that they're going to go into the zone for a couple hours at a time, not be interrupted, be able to be super productive, you're gonna make sure that tasks are clear, communicated clearly within your ticketing system, so they can just hit the ground running without having to ask people a million questions, and give them kind of the agency and the ownership they need to get stuff done. You're going to see their productivity bump, right? And ultimately, developer productivity is what you sell as an agency or even as a product company, as any kind of a company. If your team is twice as productive, and I'm sure there's some statistics I should pull up on this, but I'd imagine it's somewhere in the 2x, 3x as productive if you compare somebody that's in a flow state versus in some other distracted state. So ultimately, this is sort of the core profitability of your business is your developer productivity. And so if you can find ways to increase that significantly, those are going to be wins for you. And yeah, it's going to feel a little awkward because you're going to be used to being able to have instant access to people, and you're going to want that. But ultimately, if you take a step back and you go, hey, look, let me set up a protocol so I can let them concentrate more, it's ultimately going to be great for your business. So I think it's really worth thinking about. So that is all I had to say about that. Okay, next up. Indie maker community. So as fast as the indie maker community is growing, 10 years from now, we're going to be a force to be reckoned with. So it's interesting. I saw a tweet today from somebody who's kind of an indie maker, and they just had a ton of likes, like 500-600 likes on their tweet. And it made me think man, it makes me think also. I saw Taylor Otwell recently. He mentioned some of the numbers he's done in terms of revenue, based out of, where's he based out of? Can't remember. But the point of his tweet was, you can make software from anywhere. And obviously he's been super successful. And then I think of Rob Walling. I think of Tiny Seed. I think of the indie hackers community. I mean, I consider myself kind of an indie maker. And so we're seeing, I think, a microconf, we're seeing, if you look over the past 10 years or so, people who were starting out with relatively humble businesses, and things like that, and making a tiny bit of money, 10 years later, people that are at the top of the indie maker game are making a lot of money and doing really well and, really kind of staying true to their roots. as indie makers, and yet, sort of adding infrastructure. I mean, Tiny Seed is a really interesting example because it's an accelerator. They're investing in, it's an investment fund, and yet it has this real genuine purpose that's tied to the indie maker community. And so anyways, I was thinking like, man, as fast as this movement has been growing, and then fast forward that 10, 20 years from now, like the indie maker community is going to be a force to be reckoned with. Like there's going to be like, I don't know what the numbers are going to be, but the numbers are going to be, they're already pretty massive. I mean, you look at the indie hackers community, they're going to be even more massive in terms of the number of people. And then in terms of the number of people that are at the top of their game, I mean, there's already lots of, millionaires in this category. I don't know what the numbers are in this category, but that number is going to grow, right? I mean, and so it just occurred to me that like not only is this a really cool community of people who, like to just build stuff and make stuff, and it's just a great community, like also it's going to become a pretty strong force in the world. I mean, I was thinking like maybe at some point they'll have political lobbies and so who knows? I mean, it's just like it's a movement that's going to continue to grow and do awesome things, and it's really cool to be a part of that. So yeah. All right, next up. All right, next up here. And I think I'm going to make this my last topic for today. Tweet from Steve Schlafman, Twitter handle SCHLAF. 30 years is how long it took to create the internet. 30 years is how long it took from exercise not being a thing to gyms and yoga studios being everywhere. 30 years is how long it took for most of the population to stop smoking. And I guess he's referencing Yancey Strickler, the author of This Could Be Our Future, A Manifesto for a More Generous World. Oh, co-founder of Kickstarter. Really interesting character. And he's quoting them on compounding returns. And then I replied to that, crypto blockchain at the 30-year mark is going to be wild. So it's, what are we, 10 years into Bitcoin, something like that ish. And, a lot of people are still wondering, is this going to even go anywhere? Some people say, look, it's already totally 100% demonstrated that it has gone somewhere, and we're at the 10-year mark. There's something about that 30-year mark, as evidenced by these several really impressive examples where you can look back and go, yeah, that things changed dramatically over that 30-year mark. And sometimes we can be so short-sighted, even though we see history kind of repeat itself. We still can tend to be really short-sighted, and we're like, well, XYZ was supposed to happen and it didn't happen yet, and it's been several years and it still didn't happen, or it's still not mature enough yet. But like, look at things over a 30-year time horizon, and some and really, really massive shifts in technology and in the world happen over a 30-year period. So, I do think that Bitcoin, blockchain, I don't know very much about blockchain, to be honest. It's something I kind of keep a little bit of an eye on. But I do think that's going to be the future in a major way. But I don't know exactly what that is going to look like, and we don't have too many great examples of it yet. It's still kind of abstract, even when you hear about blockchain use cases, you're like, nah, I kind of get it, kind of don't get it. But I think that by the 30-year mark, we're going to go, okay, I get it. I see what the deal is here. So anyway, that is all I have for you today. I hope that you have a fantastic Monday, and I will see you tomorrow.